Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler's harsh words sliced across the firing range like a final verdict. Hand her a rifle, and she'll likely shoot her own foot before hitting anything downrange. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne, 28 years old, bore 3 distinct scars on her forearm. Each marked a vow etched into her skin after she pulled 2 dying comrades through a minefield, enemy fire ripping the earth around them. She had dispatched 14 adversaries in 18 minutes with a rifle, much like the one Cutler now mocked her for holding. And she'd accomplished it in conditions that would have sent him scrambling for cover and calling for rescue. Cutler believed he was humiliating some unqualified recruit, a diversity hire, who didn't belong on his range. He had no clue that 4 senior naval officers, observing from a dark SUV, knew exactly who she was. His career would be over before the day ended. The desert breeze at Camp Pendleton carried fine dust that clung to everything. It was 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in late September, the rifle range stretching beneath a sky still gray with pre-dawn light. The shimmering heat haze would appear later, but for now the air was cool enough to see one's breath, and the scent of gun oil mingled with grit and the diesel fumes from the Humvees parked behind the firing line. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne stood poised at the 1,000-yard mark, her M40A6 sniper rifle resting against her shoulder. Its familiar weight felt as natural as her own pulse. She was 5 feet, 7 inches tall, slender from years of humping heavy gear across impossible terrain. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her gray eyes tracked movement with the intensity of a wolf watching its prey. There was a profound stillness about her that unsettled people. Not the rigid posture of parade rest, but the deep calm of someone who had mastered fear so completely it no longer registered as an emotion. She didn't glance at the men gathered 30 meters behind her. She could feel their doubt, a tangible heat radiating like asphalt. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler stood among them, arms folded, his jaw steadily working a piece of chewing gum. He was 46, broad-chested, with 24 years in the Corps and a reputation for running the most demanding scout sniper selection program on the West Coast. Beside him stood 3 junior Marines, lance corporals who had earned their places through Cutler's brutal process. They watched Thorne with the cold judgment of men who believed she was occupying a slot that should have been theirs. But others were also present. 4 men in desert fatigues, their name tapes absent, stood apart from Cutler's group near a black SUV that hadn't been there an hour ago. Navy officers, clearly senior. 3 displayed the eagles of captains, equivalent to Marine colonels, and 1 wore the silver oak leaves of a commander. One of them held a tablet, repeatedly checking its screen, then glancing towards Thorne's position. Thorne gently touched the scars on her forearm, 3 clean, deliberate lines, then smoothly settled into her shooting stance. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing the line was ready. Thorne's breathing deepened and slowed. Her heart rate steadied, everything else faded away. She had no idea that in the next 3 hours, the truth she'd kept hidden for 6 months was about to explode. Lennox Thorne grew up in Fossil, Oregon, a town of 73 residents. Her father operated a gunsmithing shop from a barn behind their home, and her mother worked as a surgical nurse at the regional hospital 40 miles away. She learned to shoot at 6, hunted by 8, and by 12 could field strip and reassemble an M1 Garand blindfolded. Her father believed that understanding machinery was a form of discipline. The truly lasting lesson arrived when she was 14. Her father took her deer hunting in the Uco Mountains during a November snowstorm. They were 4 miles from their truck when she took a hurried shot at a mule deer from 300 yards. She rushed, yanked the trigger and missed completely. The buck vanished into the tree. Her father then made her sit silently in the snow for an hour, staring at the empty space where the animal had been. He told her that in shooting, as in life, you get only 1 chance to do it right. After that you live with the outcome. She never rushed another shot. At 18 she joined the Marine Corps. At 20 she volunteered for Marine reconnaissance training. By 22 she was chosen for a Joint Special Operations Task Force, a secretive unit, drawing operators from MARSOC, SEAL Team 6, and Delta Force, for missions in places the United States officially wasn't. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, March 20. The mission was meant to be simple overwatch. Thorne and her spotter, a Force Recon Gunnery Sergeant named Brooks, were positioned on a ridgeline, providing security for a Delta team extracting a high-value target from a compound 2 kilometers north. The operation proceeded smoothly until the Delta team's extraction helicopter took a rocket-propelled grenade through its tail rotor, crashing hard into a wadi half a kilometer from Thorne's position. Brooks immediately reported it. Command stated a quick reaction force was 20 minutes away. Taliban fighters, however, would swarm the crash site in 5. Thorne and Brooks abandoned their hide and ran, not away but toward the downed aircraft. They found 2 Delta operators alive but pinned down. One had a compound femur fracture, the other shrapnel through his abdomen, his intestines visibly protruding. The Taliban were advancing from 3 directions, using a dry riverbed for cover, moving swiftly and with practiced skill. Thorne quickly set up in a shallow depression, put Brooks on security and began her work. She eliminated 14 Taliban fighters in 18 minutes. Ranges varied from 200 to 600 meters. Every shot was a headshot or a high thoracic cavity hit, threaded through cover gaps that existed for less than 2 seconds. She felt her heartbeat in her fingertips, felt the trigger break like glass, and watched through her scope as men fell and did not rise. Brooks died holding security. A burst from a PKM machine gun struck him while he covered Thorne's right flank. The rounds pierced his plate carrier at an upward angle, hitting his subclavian artery. He bled out in 90 seconds. Thorne tried to apply a tourniquet high on his shoulder, but the anatomy prevented it. She held pressure with both hands, feeling his blood pump hot between her fingers, until it stopped. The 2 Delta operators survived. Thorne dragged both of them, one at a time, 400 meters through a minefield to the QRF's landing zone. Her forearm was gashed open by concertina wire she hadn't seen in the dark. Later in the medical tent, while awaiting the corpsman to stitch her up, she took a scalpel and carved 3 parallel lines into her arm, just above the wire cut. 1 for Brooks, 2 for the men she had saved. A stark reminder that every shot truly mattered, because someone's life was always on the line. The task force commander nominated her for a Navy Cross. The award citation was heavily edited, most operational details removed. Her service record was cleansed of any mention of the task force. She was reassigned to a training command at Camp Pendleton, placed under administrative cover with orders to remain out of sight until the political fallout from the Afghanistan withdrawal settled. That had been 6 months ago. She'd been effectively invisible ever since. Just another staff sergeant overseeing rifle qualifications and teaching new Marines how to zero their optics, until Gunnery Sergeant Cutler decided she needed to be put in her place. Vance Cutler wasn't a malicious Marine. That made his behavior worse. He had earned his rank through arduous effort, 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, a Bronze Star with a V device, for pulling a wounded lance corporal from a burning vehicle in Ramadi. He fiercely believed in standards. He believed the Marine Corps had to be tough because war was tough. He believed that lowering expectations to make anyone feel included was a betrayal of everyone who had bled to earn the title. And he believed that women did not belong in combat roles. He would never voice this officially. He knew better. But everyone in his unit understood his stand. When Staff Sergeant Thorne arrived on his range 3 weeks prior with orders assigning her as an assistant instructor, Cutler smiled, shook her hand, and then made a discreet phone call to his battalion sergeant major, inquiring if there had been some administrative error. There hadn't been, so he proceeded professionally. He assigned her the worst shifts, the most tedious paperwork, kept her away from actual shooting instruction, and waited for her to quit or request a transfer. She did. Instead, she arrived early, stayed late, and managed every safety brief and range detail with an unassailable competence. She rarely spoke, never complained, and didn't socialize. It drove him to distraction. Then 2 days ago, Lance Corporal DeHaven, one of Cutler's top students, mentioned seeing Staff Sergeant Thorne shooting alone on range. He claimed she'd placed 10 rounds into a target at 800 yards in under 90 seconds, all center mass hits, using only backup iron sights instead of optics. Cutler didn't believe it, yet he couldn't simply dismiss it, so he arranged this demonstration. He informed Thorne that, since she was assigned to his sniper screening program, she needed to prove she met minimum standards, an official 1,000-yard qualification, 5 rounds. 3 hits in the black were required to pass. He ensured the entire instructor staff was present. He made sure that junior Marines were watching. He made sure everyone understood this wasn't merely about qualification, it was about making a statement. What Cutler didn't realize was that the 4 Navy officers near the black SUV were not random visitors. They were Captain Marcus Hale, Captain Vincent Shaw, Captain David Ux, and Commander Naomi Trent, all SEAL Command staff from Naval Special Warfare Group 1, all veterans of Joint Special Operations Command, and all intimately familiar with who Lennox Thorne truly was. They had come to Camp Pendleton for a routine liaison meeting with Marine Special Operations Command, and had caught wind through their network that someone was about to publicly humiliate one of their former task force operators. They decided to observe. Cutler stood, arms crossed, gum snapping between his teeth, and raised his voice for all to hear. He declared that standards were immutable, and if Staff Sergeant Thorne intended to teach Marines how to shoot, she had to prove she could do it herself under pressure before witnesses without any excuses. Lance Corporal Vickers, a young man with a sunburned neck and a smirk that made him appear even younger than 20, mumbled something about diversity hires and box ticking. Cutler offered no correction. Thorne settled into her shooting position, consulted her data book and adjusted her scope for wind and elevation. Based on the mirage, she could see downrange and the flag angle at the 500-yard marker. Her hands remained steady, her breathing controlled. Behind her, Captain Hale murmured something to Captain Shaw. Shaw shook his head, a slight smile touching his lips. This was going to be unpleasant, just not in the way Cutler anticipated. Thorne wasn't thinking about Cutler. She wasn't thinking about the Marines observing her, or the officers who had somehow appeared behind the firing line. She thought of Brooks, not an abstract memory, but the vivid details, the sound of his breathing in those final 90 seconds, wet, strained, the awful gurgle of a punctured lung filling with blood. The way his hand had clutched her wrist, then gone limp. The way his eyes had remained open after he died, staring blankly until she reached up and gently closed them with fingers slick with his blood. She had made a promise over his body, while waiting for the QRS. She told him, or what was left of him, that every shot she fired for the rest of her life would hold meaning, would be precise, would honor what he had taught her. Cutler believed this was a test of her competence. It wasn't. It was the continuation of a dialogue she'd been having with a dead man for 3 years. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, letting her body merge with the dirt, feeling the weapon become an extension of her own bones. Her pulse was 58 beats per minute. Her breathing followed a precise rhythm. 6 seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out. The target, a paper silhouette 1,000 yards away, was barely visible even through the scope, shimmering in the heat haze that now began to rise as the sun climbed higher. She had made this shot 1,000 times in training. She had made it for real in Helmand, with bullets whizzing past her head and the stench of burning fuel and blood filling her nostrils. But never had it carried such immense personal weight, because if she missed, if she gave Cutler even the slightest justification to dismiss her, the 6 months of silence, of hiding, of pretending to be someone smaller and quieter than she truly was, would be utterly wasted. Her finger found the trigger, 2.5 pounds of pressure on a factory trigger she herself had tuned. Smooth, consistent. She didn't pray, she didn't hope, she simply executed the work Brooks had taught her. The first shot broke cleanly. The sound echoed across the range, bouncing off the berms downrange. The spotter in the observation tower keyed his radio. Center mass. 10 ring. Cutler's jaw tightened. Beside him, Lance Corporal Vickers' smirk vanished. Thorne cycled the bolt, ejected the spent casing, and chambered another round. She took her time, letting her breathing normalize. The wind had shifted. She felt it gently on her left cheek, roughly 3 miles per hour, quartering from the northwest. She dialed in 0.5 milliradian of windage. The second shot hit. Center mass. 10 ring. The range fell silent. Even the Marines, who had been murmuring in low tones behind the safety line, stopped talking. Captain Hale, standing 30 meters back with the other Navy officers, pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke quietly, nodded, and then ended the conversation. Cutler watched the target through his binoculars, his knuckles white against the rubberized casing. Thorne fired 3 more rounds in 4 minutes. Every single one punched through the black. The final shot, taken as a wind gust, made the flag snap horizontal, passed through the exact center of the target, obliterating the previous hole. Perfect score, the range officer announced over the loudspeaker. Qualification complete. expert marksman. Thorne cleared her weapon, locked the bolt to the rear, stood and brushed the dust from her uniform. Cutler walked towards her, his face flushed, not from the sun. He told her that qualification scores meant nothing in real-world situations. That shooting a stationary target on a flat range without time pressure was not the same as combat. If she truly wanted to prove she belonged in his program, she would need to pass the full pre-scout sniper indoctrination, a 72-hour field exercise designed to break candidates before they even reached formal sniper school. He said it would begin in 1 hour. He added that she could decline with no professional repercussions, return to her regular instructor duties, and everyone would forget this ever happened. Or she could pack her gear and discover what real standards looked like. Thorne looked at him for 3 long seconds. Then she stated simply, "I'll be ready." The indoctrination began at 8. 12 candidates, 11 men, 1 woman, 60-pound rucksacks, a 15-mile movement through Camp Pendleton's rugged backcountry, followed by a series of tactical problems, navigation exercises, and shooting drills, all engineered to test performance under extreme exhaustion. Cutler led from the front, setting a pace just shy of running, offering no break. By mile 5, 2 candidates had dropped, heat casualties unable to maintain the pace in the rising temperature. By mile 8, Thorne's shoulders screamed. The ruck straps had chafed her collarbones raw, even through her blouse. Her boots were sodden with sweat. Her lower back felt as if nails were being driven into her spine with every step, yet her breathing remained steady. Her pace stayed unwavering. Lance Corporal Vickers was struggling. She could see it in how he stumbled on downhills, how his pack sagged to one side, how his face had turned a pale gray beneath the dirt and sweat. At mile 10, Cutler halted the formation and announced a navigation problem. Each candidate had to move alone to a checkpoint 2 kilometers north, using only a map and compass. Then they were to establish a hide position and engage targets at unknown distances, between 400 and 700 meters. The time limit was 90 minutes. Thorne checked her map, shot an azimuth with her lensatic compass, and moved out. The terrain was brutal, steep ravines choked with chaparral, loose shale that shifted underfoot, making every step a calculated risk. She navigated by terrain association, used the sun's position to verify her compass bearing, moving swiftly but cautiously. She reached her checkpoint in 42 minutes. She set up in a shallow depression overlooking the target array. She ranged the targets using mil-dot reticle measurements in her scope, 420. He simply marked her scorecard and moved to the next checkpoint. By hour 60 of the 72-hour indoctrination, Thorne had outdone every other candidate in every measurable category: navigation accuracy, marksmanship scores, observation and reporting drills, land navigation under time pressure. Cutler detested her for it. On the final night, during a brief rest period, he pulled her aside. He told her that excelling at individual tasks didn't make someone a good Marine, that the Corps needed people who could lead under fire, who could inspire trust in their teams, who belonged. He didn't explicitly say she didn't belong. He didn't have to. The final event was a stalk. Each candidate had to move undetected across 800 meters of open terrain, get within 200 meters of an observation post manned by instructor cadre, and take 2 shots at designated targets, without being spotted. If the cadre saw you, if they could pinpoint your position before you fired, you failed. Thorne began her stalk at 5:30 in the morning, just before dawn. She moved on her belly through the brush, exploiting every depression and shadow, inching forward 6 feet at a time. It took her 907 minutes to cover the distance. She found her final firing position in a cluster of manzanita bushes, settled in, ranged her targets with her scope, and fired 2 shots. 2 hit. From the observation post, Staff Sergeant Paloma, one of the cadre instructors, radioed that he had registered the shots, but could not identify the shooter's position. Cutler, listening on the command net, refused to believe it. He instructed Paloma to grid the area and conduct a physical search. Paloma complied, found nothing. Cutler walked out to the search area himself. He stood 8 feet from Thorne's hidden position and meticulously swept the terrain with his binoculars, looking for any sign of disturbance. Still, he didn't see her. She waited until he turned away, then stood up, brushing off the camouflage netting she had crafted from natural vegetation, and emerged from the bushes. Cutler spun around, staring. His face went ashen. She had been right there the entire time. That's when the black SUV pulled up. Captain Marcus Hale stepped out, followed by the 3 other Navy officers. They had been observing from a distance for portions of the past 3 days, monitoring the entire indoctrination. Hale walked directly to Cutler, extended his hand, and introduced himself by rank and name, Captain Marcus Hale, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Then he asked Cutler if he knew who he had been attempting to break for the past 72 hours. Cutler replied that she was Staff Sergeant Thorne, an instructor assigned to his screening program. Hale's expression remained unchanged. He informed Cutler that her name was Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne, a former attached operator with the Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, a recipient of the Navy Cross for actions in Helmand Province, where she was credited with 14 enemy kills in a single engagement under direct fire, and responsible for saving the lives of 2 critically wounded Delta Force operators during a contested casualty evacuation under enemy contact. He told Cutler that Thorne possessed a service record including qualifications most SEALs never attained, and that her shooting performance in the task force's internal assessments had placed her in the top 3% of all special operations designated marksmen across all branches. He told Cutler that the only reason she was at Camp Pendleton running basic rifle qualifications was because the Marine Corps had placed her in administrative holding following the Afghanistan withdrawal, while her clearances were updated and her next assignment was determined. And he told Cutler that publicly humiliating a decorated combat veteran in front of junior Marines was not maintaining standards. It was an abuse of authority that reflected poorly on his judgment and his fitness to hold a leadership position in a training command. Cutler stood frozen, his mouth agape. No words came out. Captain Shaw stepped forward and informed Cutler that a formal complaint had been filed with his battalion commander regarding his conduct during the qualification shoot and the subsequent indoctrination. An investigation would follow. His role as chief instructor for the Scout Sniper Screening Program was suspended pending the outcome. Hale turned to Thorne. He asked if she was ready to return to active duty. He said there was a training development cell at Naval Special Warfare that could greatly benefit from someone with her background. Thorne looked at Cutler, then at Lance Corporal Vickers and the other junior Marines who had been watching from a distance, their faces pale with shock. She told Hale she appreciated the offer, but she had unfinished business at Pendleton. There were Marines here who needed to learn how to shoot properly. She had made a promise to someone that her work would hold meaning. She intended to keep it. Hale nodded. He told her the door was always open when she was ready. Then the 4 Navy officers climbed back into the SUV and drove away, leaving Cutler standing alone in the dirt, his entire world crumbling around him. 2 weeks later, Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler was reassigned to Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, in a logistics support role, not a formal demotion, but a quiet removal from any position involving training or leadership development. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant and assumed the role of Chief Instructor for the Scout Sniper Screening Program. Her first class comprised 14 candidates, including 2 women. She ran them exactly as Cutler had, hard, unforgiving, with no concessions for weakness or excuses. But she also taught them what Brooks had taught her, that shooting wasn't about ego or proving dominant. It was about precision under pressure, about making the one shot that counted when someone's life depended on it. Lance Corporal Vickers was in that first class. He didn't drop out, didn't quit. He worked harder than anyone else because he had learned that underestimating someone based on their background, instead of their demonstrated skill, was the fastest way to fail at everything important. On the final day of the indoctrination, Vickers passed his. Thorne walked out to his position afterward, told him he'd done solid work, and that he had potential if he was willing to set aside his assumptions and stay humble. He asked her if the story was true, if she had really saved 2 Delta operators in Afghanistan. She told him that what she had done in the past no longer mattered. What mattered was what every Marine did right now, in this moment, when the shot had to count and there were no second chances. Then she handed him his scorecard and moved on to the next candidate. That night, alone in her quarters, Thorne sat on her bunk and ran her fingers over the 3 scars on her forearm, 1 for Brooks, 2 for the men she had saved. She didn't know if he would be proud of what she was doing now, teaching instead of fighting, staying quiet instead of seeking fame. But she knew he would understand. Because every Marine she trained to shoot cleanly, to think clearly under duress, to value precision over pride, every single one of them was another life that might be saved when it mattered most. And that was enough. She turned off the light, closed her eyes, and let the desert wind rattle the window as she finally slept.